I'm honored to be here today in this beautiful room, speak to you. I got very emotional listening to this music, and I don't know what you heard, but in that Ukrainian composer music was very sad, but they had a hint of hope in the end. I don't know about you, but that's what I felt, and that's how I feel about Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting the war, but Ukraine being brave and Ukrainians being very resilient. And this music, there would be a victory in the end. I will tell you the story, how we came to this moment. It is important to understand the development of the history and make our decisions and choices, and how the decisions and choices are changing our societies and changing our lives for the better. I came to you from the United States, where I had accepted the Inamori Ethics Prize given to people to honor outstanding international ethical leaders whose action and influence have greatly improved the condition of humankind. For the first time since 2008, this year, it was given to journalists. The selecting committee felt it is important in our time of polarization and disinformation to acknowledge the importance of principled journalism. In Ukraine, with Pan-Ukrainian and Kyiv-Mohyla Business School, since 2019, we are awarding the Gongadze Prize, named after my late husband, to acknowledge the support Ukrainian journalists who are committed to fact-based journalism. Andriy Dubchak, who is with us today, whose exhibit we have opened today, was nominated for Gongadze Prize this year. Late Mr. Emamori, Japanese businessman, philanthropist, and philosopher, taught us, take any challenge with courage and do what is right. And today we are here to acknowledge brave reporters like Andriy and many of you who are doing what is right. Last year, at this time, I was standing in a different spot, in another part of the world. I was in the middle of a horrific scene at the mass grave near the small eastern Ukrainian town of Izum. I was witnessing the uncovering of bodies of Ukrainians killed by Russian forces. Retreating in the face of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, they left behind chilling signs of the horror Ukrainians suffered over the time of occupation for 6 months. Locals told me stories of people who went missing and were tortured. Some people, including children, were killed just for speaking Ukrainian or wearing Ukrainian symbols. The pine tree forest where I was standing held evidence of Russian war crimes. Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine. I had to be there to witness and tell this story to the world. Now, many of us know names of Ukrainian towns, Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol. According to the last reports from the beginning of the large-scale armed attack by Russia, 13 million people have been displaced. Nearly 10,000 civilians were killed and 17,000 were injured in Ukraine. Scenes of skulls with bullet holes, bodies with hands tied behind their backs, mutilated, with visible signs of torture, the smell of death and despair in that forest brought traumatic personal memories and made me fully realize what the Ukrainian nation went through for hundreds of years of occupation under Russian Soviet Kremlin regime. When I was growing up in the Soviet Union, I didn't understand any of this. My small, picture-perfect Western Ukrainian town of Berezhany held a lot of dark history of the 20th century. But in 1972, the year I was born, it was all hidden. And my neighbors were preparing to step into the communism era. In school, I learned about Stalin's successful industrial policy and great patriotic war and poor people in America suffering from capitalism. I didn't learn anything about my heritage or the history of Ukraine. The use of words like independence Ukraine, blue and yellow national flag, or God was a punishable offense. At home, though, hiding on the wall next to my parents' wedding day picture, where we had an icon of Jesus and saints with traditional Ukrainian embroidery towels over them. My father, a head engineer at the radio factory, made us kids pray before meals at home. After school, doing my homework was not a priority. My job as an oldest child was to stand in multiple lines in a different grocery stores to buy milk, bread, or fish. Getting food on the table was the constant struggle for our family with 3 kids, and we were no different from any other family. After supper, my father would reach for the radio that he made for himself. Sitting quietly on his side of the bed, he would search for foreign radio station, jammed by the government. He needed to know what was really happening in the world. We would go to bed with the cracking sound of some strange announcement. This is Voice of America from Washington. Yes, we, like many Soviet families, lived a double life. I grew up with the realization that not everything is written in the paper or said on TV is true. From young age, I learned you cannot repeat anything your parents say at the dinner table or tell anyone what you heard on that foreign radio station that your father listened under the cover of the night. I was confused. What is truth? The things that they tell you in school or what your parents teach you? So all my adolescence, I was on a journey to learn my own Ukrainian history. I have learned about the short period of Ukrainian independence in 1918, recognized by Europeans after World War I, but crashed by the Soviet regime a few years later. I have learned about Stalin's policy to crush Ukrainian identity and the man-made famine, Holodomor, which in early 30s, by different estimates, took lives of more than 7 million Ukrainians. I learned about the Ukrainian resistance movement after World War II. I learned about Gulag and Ukrainian leadership murdered by Soviet regime, and later Ukrainian dissidents of the 60s and 70s sent to camps in Siberia. My world, as I knew it, crashed on me. I was fed up with constant lies. I needed to know and be able to tell the truth. This desire led me to journalism, which I have been doing for more than 25 years. The collapse of Soviet Union in 1991 opened the door for freedom for me and my friends. It was an exciting time, the beginning of my adult life and the beginning of independence of my country, a special time for both of us. I was studying law, but curiosity and constant search for a better understanding of life around me brought me to journalism. It was the same for another young student from the English language department, Myroslava Gongadze, who wanted to tell the story of his native country turned by war, Georgia. We started working together, and soon we were both employed by the newly established Lviv independent newspaper, Postum. We were building a new democracy and establishing an independent media that didn't exist in Ukraine. We saw the bright future ahead. In these initial years of Ukraine's independence, we were free to cover any story. It was interesting. I was interested in covering international affairs, and my first assignment was in Belgrade to cover a war-wrecked country of Serbia. We went to the presidential palace for the meeting with Milosevic. I look at his gloomy, unsmiling face, trying to understand what was driving this man to start genocide. It was 1996, just a few months after he was forced to sign the Dayton Agreement and freeze the military operation in Bosnia. While I ventured to do international news, Georgi was deeply involved with covering the internal politics and growing corruption. He produced and anchored a weekly TV show about current affairs. At one of the shows, he told the story about so-called Kuchma clan, the ring of oligarchs around the president. The presidential administration noticed Georgi was warned by the management of the company. They started to censoring him. We started getting recommendations from the management, what story to cover and what to stay away from. We felt the time were changing and the window of freedom was closing on us. The president and his circle took a tighter grip on the media. Journalists who would ask uncomfortable questions would lose their jobs. One would commit suicide, another would die from television explosion in his apartment. All of this would be called accidents, and none of them would be investigated. We were expecting our children when Georgi told me he had to quit another job. But he could not stop digging for the truth, investigating illegal foreign banks accounts of the top country's officials close to the president, election frauds, infiltration of Russian agents, and corrupt deals. We now know that feeding corruption and strengthening oligarchs in Ukraine to keep the country's dependency on Russian money and energy was Russia's strategy for keeping Ukraine in its sphere. In 2000, the circumstances were dire for free journalism in Ukraine. So my husband decided to create his own newspaper. It would be the internet publication with no printing cost. Creating an internet news website, which he would call Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian Truth, would become the only way he and some other brave reporters could do their jobs. At the time when not even 1% of the country's population had internet access, he thought this was the way and only way to stay independent and relevant and to speak to the world. What he did not foresee was how seriously the people in power would take this as a threat and what kind of danger he was putting himself in. After months of being under surveillance, on September 16, 23 years ago, my husband did not simply come home. 2 months later, in a local morgue, I saw what was left from him. My husband's once perfectly built body of a runner with handsome face and big smile was discovered in the forest near the country's capital, Kyiv. He was killed by the government police because the president wanted to silence him. In the day after his disappearance, I was left in total shock and despair. I had 2 young kids on my hands. I was afraid to go to home that I knew was under surveillance, and I was warned not to talk on the phone. I felt lost, confused, helpless, angry, and then I had to make a decision: to keep quiet and accept the loss, or speak up and fight for justice, but possibly put my own life at risk. I chose the second. I got the strength to go public. I used my legal knowledge to demand the investigation and challenge it in court. I reached out to friends and co-workers in the media, asking them to tell the story, friends in civil society to organize events, and some public figures I knew to speak out for the case. People will tell me that I have zero chance to find out what happened to Georgi or get any justice. But I promised to myself to do everything in my control to push the investigation forward. I promised myself and the public that this crime would not be unpunished. It had an effect. The Ukrainian public was moved, and the story about Georgi started dominating the news in Ukraine and started to be picked up by foreign media. But after the months of fruitless struggle, I was forced to leave. The US took me and my 2 kids in as a refugee. I arrived in the United States with no money, 2 suitcases, and no English. I was determined to keep working as a reporter because I saw it as my mission. And I have never given up trying to fight for justice. My pursuit of justice and truth prompted me to raise my voice against violence toward journalists, shaped my commitment to the protection of journalists, and cemented my desire to see Ukraine as an independent, just, and strong society. While I was successful in some of my pursuits, I failed in others. I was able to get only partial justice. All the perpetrators of the crime served prison time, and the general who organized the kidnapping and murder was sent to life in prison. It took me over 20 years to see the final verdict in this case. But instigators of the crime were never brought to justice. My determination inspired people to find their own voices in pursuit of more just society and paved the way for 2 subsequent revolutions in Ukraine. During the Orange Revolution in 2004, Ukrainians demonstrated the world their desire for freedom, justice, and democracy. They brought the new leadership to power, but it failed to deliver most of the promises given to the people on Maidan. Disillusioned and discouraged, Ukrainians again elected pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. A few years later, when they discover his true colors, They ousted the president in 2014 during yet another revolution, the Revolution of Dignity. This time, the government used force against peaceful demonstrators. During the winter of 2013-14, more than 100 people died during street fight in the center of Kyiv. After the president fled the country to Russia, Ukraine was invaded. Seeing Ukraine's progress and Ukrainian inspiration toward joining the European Union and NATO in February of 2022, the Kremlin decided to crush Ukrainian spirit and resistance by waging full-scale war. By bombarding schools and cultural institutions, they are killing Ukrainians and committing genocide in the country. And we, as a journalist, doing our job on the front line and elsewhere to tell the world the story of Ukraine today. One of the first casualties of this war was my Nieman Fellow student classmate. He was shot to death filming the Ukrainians fleeing from Irpin. 17 of Ukrainian journalists, Ukrainian and foreign journalists were killed during this war for now. And I'm grateful for journalists around the world who are ready to do what is right, to go and cover this story, because searching for the truth and searching for the facts, that's what is our mission and our job. Defending journalists, defending these reporters, supporting reporters, we are doing what is right. We are supporting our freedom. Defending Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, we are defending our own democracy. And we all have to do the better job to search for that sometimes unattainable truth for the service of others. That's how I see my mission, and what I want you, all of you, to do the same. Thank you.